All right, so here we're looking at an introduction to complex numbers. Complex numbers are another realm of numbers that exist in conjunction with the real numbers. So you want to think of complex numbers as like a different dimension, right? So you have your real numbers, which is where we primarily work in math, and then you have your complex numbers, which is another dimension, right? Where there's an entire set of rules that govern complex numbers. Now, sometimes we will transfer from real numbers to complex numbers, particularly when we have negative inside of a square root. So anytime you have a negative integer or a negative value inside of a square root, this will have to be converted into a complex number. And that's basically what we're looking at here. So I'm giving you the initial definition of a complex number. A complex number is written as I, but it also stands for the square root of -1. Okay, so many times what we see is when we have to simplify complex numbers is that we have to turn them from real numbers into complex numbers by switching them to the form where I is visible. Okay, so let me show you how that's done. We're being asked to simplify the square root or the negative times the square root of -4. We're going to focus on the interior of the square root right now, which is -4. Now there's also a property of square roots that tells us that we can rewrite this as negative times the square root of 4 times -1, right? In order to get -4, it has to be a product of some two numbers. Well, those two numbers could be the +4 times the -1. Since it's a product happening inside of the square root, we can separate it one step further, bring down the negative, and we can split this product up as the product of square root of 4 times the square root of -1. And this is possible with any negative integer that is inside of the square root. Okay. Now, the reason we separate it out like this is to show you that, hey, this is the square root of 4, but at the same time, it's also the square root of -1. And we know what the square root of -1 is equal to. The square root of -1 is equal to the letter I. Right. So part of the simplification process is taking the square root of -1 and turning it into I. So here's what we're going to get. Right? We have the negative. We know that square root of 4 is actually 2. So we can take the square root of 4 now because 4 is no longer negative, it's a +4. So the square root of 4 is 2. And then the square root of -1 becomes I. So the simplification of the value negative square root of -4 is actually just -2I.